The first rays of dawn filtered through the tattered curtains of Eliza's boarding house room, painting long golden fingers across the rough wooden floor. Bethany Vaughn stared at her meager belongings stuffed hastily into a worn leather satchel, her heart pounding like a hammer against an anvil. She had exactly 17 minutes to disappear from Brownsville, Texas, before the stagecoach rattled out of town, taking her far away from the biggest mistake of her 22 years. Texas, in 1875, was no place for a woman alone, but Bethany had long ago decided that solitude was preferable to the suffocating grasp of her aunt's household in Boston. 6 months ago, she had arrived in this dusty border town with dreams of independence and adventure. Now she was fleeing like a thief in the night. Bethany glanced over her shoulder at the sleeping form sprawled across the narrow bed. Jackson Whitaker's broad shoulders rose and fell with each breath, his rugged face softened in sleep. Last night had been unexpected. A moment of weakness after weeks of stolen glances and careful conversations. She'd been drawn to the quiet cowboy since he'd first tipped his hat to her outside the general store, but getting involved with him had never been part of her plan. Her fingers traced the folded telegram in her pocket, the summons back to Boston, that provided the perfect excuse to run from these dangerous feelings. The man deserved better than half-truths and hasty goodbyes, but Bethany couldn't bear to see the disappointment in those earnest blue eyes when she told him she was leaving. She lifted her satchel and took a final look at Jackson. His tanned face was peaceful in repose, a lock of chestnut hair falling across his forehead. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to imagine what might have been if she were braver, if circumstances were different. "Goodbye," she whispered, the word barely audible even to her own ears. Bethany turned toward the door, her boots making the floorboards creak despite her careful steps. Her fingers had just closed around the doorknob when she heard the rustle of sheets behind her. "Going somewhere?" His voice, rough with sleep yet alert, froze her in place. Bethany closed her eyes, gathering her courage before turning to face him. Jackson was sitting up now, the sheet pooled around his waist, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "I have a stagecoach to catch," she said, forcing steadiness into her voice. "At dawn." Without saying goodbye, he swung his legs over the side of the bed, reaching for his trousers. "That's not like you, Beth." "You don't know me well enough to say what's like me," she replied, though the words lacked conviction. Jackson stood, buckling his belt as he crossed the room in 3 long strides. His calloused hand caught hers just as she began to turn the doorknob. "Please stay," he said softly. Those 2 simple words held more power than they had any right to. Bethany felt her resolve wavering, especially when Jackson's thumb brushed gently across her knuckles. "I can't," she whispered, unable to meet his gaze. "Can't or won't." His voice held no accusation, only a gentle inquiry that made her chest ache. "At least tell me why you're running out on me like this." Bethany sighed, finally looking up at him. In the growing light, she could see every line of his face, the stubble darkening his jaw and the genuine confusion in his eyes. "I received a telegram yesterday. My aunt is ill. I need to return to Boston." The half-truth tasted bitter on her tongue. Jackson studied her face carefully. "And you decided this in the middle of the night, without telling me?" It seemed simpler. He released her hand then, stepping back as though she'd struck him. "Simpler, I see." He ran a hand through his hair. "After everything we shared last night, you thought it would be simpler to just disappear." Shame colored her cheeks. "Jackson, please understand." "Oh, I understand plenty," he interrupted, reaching for his shirt. "You got what you wanted and now you're done. No need to spare the feelings of a simple cowboy." His words stung all the more because they were so far from the truth. It wasn't disinterest driving her away, it was fear. Fear of the intensity of her feelings, fear of disappointing him when he discovered who she really was. "That's not fair," she protested weakly. "Fair," Jackson laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Fair would have been waking me up, telling me to my face that you're leaving. Fair would have been giving me a chance to understand." He was fully dressed now, tucking his shirt into his pants with quick, angry movements. The tenderness of the night before had evaporated like morning dew under the harsh Texas sun. Bethany gripped her satchel tighter. "The stagecoach leaves in 10 minutes. Then you'd better hurry." Jackson retrieved his hat from the bedpost, settling it on his head with practiced ease. Wouldn't want to keep Boston waiting. She hadn't expected this to hurt so much. A clean break was supposed to be easier, a quick goodbye and a letter left on the table, perhaps. Not this confrontation with hurt blazing in his eyes. Jackson brushed past her, yanking the door open himself. "After you, Miss Vaughn." His formality cut deeper than his anger. Bethany stepped into the narrow hallway, blinking back unexpected tears. This was her decision, her choice to leave. She had no right to feel wounded by his reaction. They descended the boarding house stairs in tense silence. Mrs. Patterson, the landlady, looked up from her ledger with surprise as they passed the front desk. "Leaving us so soon, Miss Vaughn?" she asked, peering over her spectacles. "Family emergency," Bethany replied stiffly. "Thank you for your hospitality." Outside, the main street of Brownsville was just coming to life. A few shopkeepers were sweeping their boardwalks, and the smell of fresh bread wafted from the bakery down the street. The stagecoach stood ready at the depot, the driver securing luggage to the top. "Well," Bethany said, turning to face Jackson, "I suppose this is goodbye." His jaw was set, his eyes shadowed beneath the brim of his hat. For a long moment he said nothing, and Bethany thought he might simply walk away. Then he reached into his vest pocket and withdrew something small. "I was going to give you this properly," he said, his voice low. "Had it all planned out." He pressed a small wooden carving into her palm, a delicate rose carved from cedar, the craftsmanship exquisite. Bethany stared at it, speechless. "Jackson, keep it," he interrupted. "A souvenir of your Brownsville adventure." The bitterness in his voice made her flinch. This wasn't how she'd wanted things to end, but what had she expected? That he would smile and wish her well, last call for the eastbound stage. The driver shouted, climbing up to his seat. Bethany closed her fingers around the wooden rose. "Thank you, it's beautiful." "Goodbye, Bethany." Jackson tipped his hat, his expression unreadable, and turned away. She watched him stride down the street, his shoulders square, his gait purposeful. In that moment, the enormity of what she was doing crashed over her. She was leaving behind the first man who had truly seen her not as a rebellious society girl or a temporary distraction, but as herself. "Wait." The word escaped her before she could stop it. Jackson paused but didn't turn around. What could she say? That she was scared. That she was running because she feared she might love him. "The telegram, it wasn't just about my aunt." Slowly, he turned to face her, his expression guarded. "What else?" Bethany swallowed hard. "She's arranged a marriage for me, to a business associate's son. It's been planned for years, and you're engaged." The hurt in his voice was palpable. "No, not exactly. It's complicated." Bethany clutched the wooden rose tighter. "My family has expectations. I came to Texas to escape them just for a while, but now." Jackson's expression darkened. "So I was just part of your rebellion, a cowboy fling before you returned to your proper Boston life." "No," Bethany said firmly. "You were never that. You're the only real thing I've found since leaving Boston." The stagecoach driver called again, more impatiently this time. Jackson studied her face. "If that's true, then why are you on that stagecoach? It was a simple question with a complicated answer. Bethany had spent her entire life conforming to others' expectations, her parents until their death, then her aunt who had raised her with rigid rules and social aspirations. Coming to Brownsville had been her first act of defiance, but she had always known it was temporary. "Because I don't know how to disappoint the only family I have left," she finally said, the truth laying her bare. Something in Jackson's expression softened. "So instead, you disappoint yourself and me." The stagecoach driver cracked his whip. "Last passenger, we're leaving." Bethany looked between the waiting stagecoach and Jackson, torn between duty and desire. The wooden rose dug into her palm, a tangible reminder of what she would be leaving behind. "I have to go," she whispered. Jackson nodded once, his jaw tight. "Then go. But know this, Bethany Vaughn, what we had wasn't just some frontier romance. At least not for me." His words followed her as she climbed into the stagecoach, settling onto the hard bench seat beside a traveling salesman and an elderly woman clutching a wicker basket. Through the window, she watched Jackson standing in the street, a solitary figure growing smaller as the stagecoach pulled away in a cloud of dust. Bethany closed her eyes, the wooden rose clutched in her hand, and tried to convince herself she had made the right decision. The stagecoach rattled east toward San Antonio, the first leg of Bethany's long journey back to Boston. Each jolt and bump seemed to emphasize the growing distance between her and Brownsville, between her and Jackson. The elderly woman beside her dozed against the window, while the salesman flipped through a catalog of ladies' undergarments with more interest than propriety warranted. Bethany stared at the passing landscape, the scrubby brush and occasional stands of oak blurring together. How had she ended up here, fleeing from the one person who made her feel truly alive? The wooden rose in her hand seemed to grow heavier with each passing mile. "Mighty fine craftsmanship," the elderly woman said suddenly, startling Bethany from her thoughts. "I beg your pardon." The woman nodded toward the carving. "That rose, someone put a lot of heart into making that for you." Bethany's thumb traced the delicate petals. "Yes, they did. Must be hard, leaving someone who cares that much." Bethany glanced sharply at her companion, but the woman's expression held only kindness, not judgment. "Sometimes we don't have a choice," Bethany replied softly. The woman smiled, the wrinkles around her eyes deepening. "My dear, we always have a choice. It's just that sometimes the right choice is the hardest one to make." Before Bethany could respond, a shout from outside caught their attention. The stagecoach lurched to an abrupt halt, throwing the passengers forward. "What's happening?" the salesman demanded, clutching his catalog to his chest. The driver's voice called down. "Roads washed out ahead. Recent rains must have taken out the bridge. We'll have to turn back to Brownsville and try the northern route tomorrow." A mixture of relief and panic washed over Bethany. Returning to Brownsville meant possibly seeing Jackson again, explaining, apologizing, or perhaps making an even bigger mess of things. The stagecoach turned laboriously on the narrow road, the horses straining against their harnesses. As they headed back the way they had come, Bethany closed her eyes, trying to calm her racing heart. Was this fate giving her another chance, or merely prolonging the inevitable goodbye? 3 hours later, they clattered back into Brownsville, the afternoon sun beating down mercilessly. The driver announced they would depart again at dawn, taking the longer northern route. Passengers dispersed to find accommodations for the unexpected night stay. Bethany stood in the dusty street, her satchel at her feet, uncertain where to go. She couldn't return to her old room at Mrs. Patterson's, not after her dramatic departure that morning. The thought of facing Jackson again filled her with equal parts dread and longing. "Didn't expect to see you back so soon." She whirled around to find Sheriff Daniel Cooper regarding her with mild curiosity. The sheriff was a middle-aged man with a salt and pepper mustache who had always treated her with courteous respect. "Bridge was washed out," Bethany explained. "We have to try a different route tomorrow." The sheriff nodded. "Been raining hard up north. You need a place to stay." "I was just considering my options." "Well, the hotel's full up with a cattle buyers convention, and Mrs. Patterson's likely rented your old room already." He stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "My wife might have a spare room if you're interested. Nothing fancy, but it's clean." Bethany hesitated. Staying with the sheriff would mean avoiding Jackson, at least for the night. Perhaps it would be best to leave town again without reopening wounds that were still fresh. "That's very kind of you, Sheriff Cooper. I would appreciate that." As they walked toward the sheriff's modest house at the edge of town, Bethany felt eyes on her. Glancing across the street, she saw Jackson emerging from the livery stable. Their gazes locked for a brief moment before he deliberately turned away, leading his horse in the opposite direction. The sheriff's wife, Martha, was a plump, cheerful woman who welcomed Bethany with genuine warmth. The spare room was small but comfortable, with a narrow bed and a window overlooking a small vegetable garden. "Dinner will be ready at 6, Martha informed her. "You just rest now. You look like you've had quite a day." Alone in the quiet room, Bethany sank onto the bed, the wooden rose still clutched in her hand. She had less than 24 hours before the stagecoach would leave again. 24 hours to decide if she was making the biggest mistake of her life. Evening fell over Brownsville, bringing with it a cooler breeze and the chorus of crickets and cicadas. Dinner with the Coopers was a simple but delicious affair of beef stew and fresh bread. Sheriff Cooper regaled her with stories of the town's more colorful characters, while Martha fussed over her like a mother hen. "So, what's taking you back east?" the sheriff asked as they finished their meal. "Family matters," Bethany replied vaguely. "My aunt has been ill." Martha clicked her tongue sympathetically. "Family must come first, of course. Still, we'll miss having you around. Won't we, Daniel?" the sheriff nodded. "Town's always brighter with young ladies like yourself bringing some civilization to our rough edges." Bethany smiled, touched by their kindness. "Brownsville has been more of a home to me than I expected when I arrived. Speaking of which," Martha said, rising to clear the plates, "young Jackson Whitaker was asking after you this afternoon. Seemed mighty concerned when he heard you'd returned." Bethany's heart skipped. "He did, MMHMM. Said if I saw you to tell you he'd be at Rivers Crossing tonight." Martha gave her a knowing look. "Something about unfinished business." Rivers Crossing was a small clearing by the Rio Grande, just outside of town. Bethany had been there once with Jackson, on a warm evening when he had taught her to skip stones across the water. Sheriff Cooper chuckled. "That boy's got it bad for you, Miss Vaughn. Been walking around like a thundercloud since you left this morning." Bethany felt her cheeks warm. "We had a disagreement." "Well," Martha said, patting her hand, "disagreements can be fixed with honest words and open hearts. That's what I always say." After helping Martha with the dishes, Bethany excused herself to her room. Through the window, she could see the moon rising, casting silver light across the landscape. Rivers Crossing would be beautiful tonight. She paced the small room, debating with herself. Going to meet Jackson would only make tomorrow's departure more painful. Yet the thought of leaving without seeing him again, without explaining properly, seemed unbearable. Before she could talk herself out of it, Bethany grabbed her shawl and slipped out of the house. The streets of Brownsville were quiet at this hour, with only the saloon showing signs of life. She kept to the shadows, not wanting to invite questions or gossip. The path to Rivers Crossing was well-worn but dark. Bethany followed it by memory and moonlight, her heart pounding with each step. What would she say to him? What could she say that wouldn't sound like empty excuses? The clearing appeared ahead, the moonlight reflecting off the slow-moving waters of the Rio Grande. A figure stood at the river's edge, tossing stones that disappeared with soft plunks into the current. Jackson must have heard her approach, for he turned before she reached him. He had removed his hat, and in the moonlight his features were cast in silver and shadow. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the night air. Bethany stopped a few paces away, suddenly unsure. "Martha Cooper gave me your message." He nodded, tossing another stone that skipped 3 times before sinking. "Figured we left things unfinished." She paused, searching for the right words. "I'm sorry for trying to leave without saying goodbye. It was cowardly." "Yes," he agreed, "it was." His bluntness surprised a laugh from her. "You're not making this easy." "Should I?" He turned to face her fully. "Make it easy for you to walk away." Bethany wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "I don't want to walk away, but my aunt is sick, I know, and has arranged a marriage for you." Jackson took a step closer. "But that's not really why you're leaving, is it?" His perception unnerved her. "What do you mean, you're scared, Beth?" Another step closer. "Not of your aunt or Boston or some arranged marriage. You're scared of what's happening between us." Bethany wanted to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. He was right, and they both knew it. "I've spent my whole life being told who to be and how to act," she finally said. "In Boston, I'm Bethany Vaughn, heiress and proper lady. Here, I thought I could be someone else for a while, but then you." She gestured helplessly between them. "I what?" Jackson pressed, now close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. "You made me feel like myself. Not an heiress, not a proper lady, just me." Tears threatened, and she blinked them back. "And that terrifies me because I don't know who that is anymore." Jackson's expression softened. He reached out slowly, as if afraid she might bolt, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I know who you are, Beth. You're the woman who argues with old man Wilson about the price of sugar, even though you could buy his whole store. You're the one who taught the Cooper kids to read when the school teacher was sick. You're the woman who cried over a wounded sparrow, but had the courage to put it out of its misery when it couldn't be saved." Each example was like a mirror held up to parts of herself she hadn't fully recognized. Bethany felt exposed, vulnerable, but also strangely validated. "And you're the woman I've fallen in love with," Jackson finished softly. The confession hung in the air between them, as tangible as the wooden rose she still carried in her pocket. "Jackson, you don't have to say anything," he interrupted. "I know you're leaving tomorrow. I just wanted you to know the truth before you go." Bethany reached into her pocket, withdrawing the rose carving. "When did you make this?" His eyes followed the movement of her fingers as she traced the petals. "Been working on it for weeks, wanted it to be perfect." "Why a rose?" A small smile played at the corner of his mouth. "You told me once that you missed the roses in your aunt's garden. Said they were the one thing about Boston you wished you could bring to Texas." The fact that he had remembered such a small detail, had spent weeks crafting this gift with his own hands, made her heart ache. "I don't know what to do," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Jackson took her free hand, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "Do what feels right, Beth. Not what your aunt expects or what Boston society demands. What does your heart tell you?" Her heart was currently trying to beat its way out of her chest, especially with him standing so close. What did feel right? Returning to Boston, to security and familiar expectations? Or staying in Brownsville, facing an uncertain future with this man who saw her more clearly than anyone ever had? "I'm not asking you to decide tonight," Jackson said, reading her hesitation. "But I am asking you to be honest with yourself and with me. Honesty, such a simple concept yet so difficult in practice. Bethany took a deep breath. I care for you, Jackson, more than I intended to, more than I thought possible after such a short time. She squeezed his hand. But I have responsibilities in Boston, people who depend on me. Your aunt has other family, doesn't she? You mentioned cousins. Yes, but, and this arranged marriage, is it legal, binding? Bethany shook her head. No, it's more of an understanding between families. But breaking it would cause a scandal, and my aunt's health is fragile. Jackson considered this, his thumb absently stroking the back of her hand. What if you returned to Boston, but not permanently, settled your affairs, made sure your aunt was cared for, then came back? The possibility had never occurred to her. You'd wait, his smile was gentle. For you, yes. Hope flickered to life within her, tentative, fragile, but real. It could take months, maybe longer. I'm not going anywhere, Beth. Whitaker Ranch isn't much yet, but it's mine, and I'm building it into something to be proud of. Bethany hadn't known he owned property. During their time together, he had mentioned working various jobs, cattle drives, breaking horses, even a stint as a deputy in a town farther north. But he had never spoken of his own ranch. You have a ranch? She asked. Jackson nodded. 20 acres just north of town. Been working it for 2 years now. It's small, but the land is good. Got a modest herd started, and the house. He hesitated. Well, it's more of a cabin right now, but I have plans to expand it. He was offering her a glimpse of a possible future, a life so different from the one waiting in Boston, yet somehow more appealing than she cared to admit. I'd like to see it sometime, Bethany said softly. Hope flared in his eyes. You could see it tomorrow before the stage leaves. The reminder of her imminent departure dampened the moment. Jackson, I still don't know if I can. He silenced her with a gentle finger to her lips. Don't decide now. Just promise me you'll think about it. Really think about what you want, not what everyone else wants for you. It was such a simple request, yet it felt momentous. When had anyone ever asked her what she wanted? I promise, she whispered. Jackson's smile was like sunrise breaking over the horizon. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, a question rather than a demand. When Bethany responded, sliding her free hand up to his shoulder, it deepened into something more profound, a conversation without words, an argument for possibilities neither had dared voice aloud. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Jackson rested his forehead against hers. Whatever you decide, Beth, know that these past months have been the best of my life. The words touched something deep within her, a truth she had been avoiding. Mine too. They stood together by the river, the moon casting their joined shadows across the water, until the night air grew cool enough to raise goosebumps on Bethany's arms. Jackson walked her back to town, their conversation turning to lighter topics, town gossip, memories of shared moments, even laughter at the salesman's inappropriate catalog on the stagecoach. At the sheriff's gate, Jackson paused. What time does the stage leave tomorrow? 9 o'clock, Bethany replied, trying to keep the sadness from her voice. He nodded. I'll be there, either to say goodbye or... He left the alternative unspoken between them. Good night, Jackson. Bethany squeezed his hand once more before reluctantly letting go. Sweet dreams, Beth. She watched him walk away, his tall figure disappearing into the shadows of the quiet town. Inside the Cooper's house, she crept to her room, careful not to wake her hosts. Sleep seemed impossible with her mind and heart racing, but eventually, exhaustion claimed her. Morning came too quickly, the sun streaming through the window to find Bethany already awake and dressed. She had spent most of the night weighing her options, considering paths forward she had never contemplated before. Martha Cooper provided a hearty breakfast of eggs, bacon, and biscuits, chattering cheerfully about town events Bethany had missed during her brief absence. Neither Martha nor the sheriff mentioned Jackson, though Bethany caught them exchanging knowing glances more than once. All too soon, it was time to gather her few possessions and head to the stagecoach depot. Sheriff Cooper insisted on escorting her, carrying her satchel despite her protests. "A gentleman doesn't let a lady carry her own luggage," he said firmly. "My mama raised me right." The town was busy with morning activity. Shopkeepers opening their doors, deliverymen making their rounds, children rushing to the schoolhouse. Bethany nodded to familiar faces, her stomach knotting tighter with each step toward the depot. The stagecoach was already waiting, the driver loading luggage onto the roof. Several passengers milled about, saying goodbyes or purchasing last-minute provisions for the journey. Bethany scanned the crowd, her heart sinking when she saw no sign of Jackson. "Your ticket, miss?" the station agent asked, checking his manifest. "Yes, Bethany fumbled in her reticule, withdrawing the crumpled paper. "Here it is." "Bethany," she turned at the sound of her name, relief flooding through her as she spotted Jackson pushing through the crowd. He was slightly out of breath, as if he had been running. "I was afraid I'd missed you," he said, reaching her side. He nodded politely to Sheriff Cooper. "Sheriff Whitaker." Cooper set down Bethany's satchel. "Well, I'll leave you two to your goodbyes." "Miss Vaughn, it's been a pleasure having you in our town. Martha and I hope you'll find your way back to us someday." With that diplomatic withdrawal, the sheriff left them standing together beside the stagecoach. "I thought maybe you'd changed your mind about coming," Bethany said. Jackson shook his head. "Had an emergency at the ranch. One of the mares went into labor early," he smiled. "Got a healthy foal for my troubles, though." "That's wonderful." She hesitated. "Boy or girl?" "Girl. Pretty little thing with a white star on her forehead." His expression grew more serious. "Beth, before you go, there's something I need to say." The driver called for passengers to board, creating a flurry of activity around them. Jackson took her hands in his. "I meant what I said last night. I love you and I'll wait for you. But if you get to Boston and decide that's where you belong, I'll understand." The selflessness of his offer struck her deeply. He was giving her freedom to choose without ultimatums or conditions. "Jackson, all aboard," the driver shouted, climbing up to his seat. Last call for San Antonio. It was time to decide. Bethany looked at the waiting stagecoach, then back at Jackson's earnest face. The wooden rose weighed heavy in her pocket, a tangible reminder of what she would be leaving behind. "I need to go to Boston," she said finally. Jackson's expression fell, though he tried to hide it. "I understand." "No, you don't." Bethany squeezed his hands. "I need to go to Boston to settle my affairs, to make arrangements for my aunt's care, to say a proper goodbye to that life." She took a deep breath. "And then I want to come back." "To you?" Hope blazed in his eyes. "You mean it?" "I do. It won't be easy and it might take time," but Jackson didn't let her finish. He pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in an embrace that drew stares and a few knowing smiles from the townspeople around them. "Jackson." Bethany laughed, even as tears of relief sprang to her eyes. "People are watching. Let them watch," he said, setting her down but keeping his arms around her. "I want the whole town to know that Bethany Vaughn is coming back to me." The driver cracked his whip impatiently. "Miss, are you getting on this coach or not?" Reality intruded on their moment of joy. Bethany pulled back slightly, her hands resting on Jackson's chest. "I still have to go, today," he nodded, sobering. "I know. How long do you think you'll be gone? 2 months, 3 at the most." She met his gaze steadily. "Will you write to me?" "Every week," he promised, "and I'll have the cabin ready for your return. Maybe even start on that proper house I've been planning." The implication warmed her cheeks. "Don't get ahead of yourself, Mr. Whitaker. A lady likes to be properly courted." His grin was boyish and charming. "Oh, I intend to court you properly, Miss Vaughn, starting right now." With that, he leaned down and kissed her, right there in the middle of the street, in front of God and Brownsville and the increasingly annoyed stagecoach driver. When they parted, both a little breathless, Bethany knew she had made the right decision. The fear that had driven her to attempt her cowardly escape the previous morning was still there, but it no longer controlled her. Something stronger had taken root: hope, courage, and the certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. "I really do have to go now," she said, reluctantly stepping back. Jackson picked up her satchel, handing it to the driver who had climbed down to hurry them along. "Safe travels, Beth. I'll be waiting." She climbed into the stagecoach, settling onto the bench beside an elderly couple. Through the window, she watched Jackson standing tall in the morning sunlight, his eyes never leaving hers as the driver snapped the reins and the horses lurched forward. This time, as Brownsville receded behind her, Bethany felt not the relief of escape but the bittersweet ache of temporary parting. The wooden rose in her pocket was a promise she intended to keep. The journey to Boston was long and arduous, with several changes of stagecoach, a steamboat up the Mississippi, and finally a train across the eastern states. Throughout the weeks of travel, Bethany clung to her resolution. Each mile seemed to strengthen her certainty rather than diminish it. By the time she arrived at her aunt's stately Beacon Hill home, Bethany knew exactly what she needed to do. The grand house with its polished banisters and velvet drapes no longer impressed her. Instead, she found herself comparing it unfavorably to the simple, honest beauty of the Texas landscape. Her aunt, Judith Vaughn, was indeed ill, though not as severely as the telegram had implied. The older woman received Bethany in her bedroom, propped up against satin pillows, her thin face brightening at the sight of her niece. "Bethany, my dear girl, you've come home at last." She extended a frail hand, which Bethany took carefully. "I was beginning to think Texas had stolen you from us forever." "Hello, Aunt Judith." Bethany kissed her cheek. "How are you feeling?" "Better, now that you're here." Her aunt's shrewd eyes took in Bethany's appearance. "Though I must say, the frontier has left its mark on you. You're positively brown from the sun." Bethany smiled, having expected such criticism. "The Texas sun shows no respect for parasols, I'm afraid." "Well, no matter. A few weeks indoors will restore your complexion." Aunt Judith patted the edge of the bed, inviting Bethany to sit. "I have wonderful news. Edward Harrington has agreed to move the wedding date forward. You can be married by Christmas." And there it was, the very conversation Bethany had been dreading. "Aunt Judith, about that." "I need to talk to you about Edward and the arrangement." "Oh, not now, dear." Her aunt waved dismissively. "I'm feeling rather tired. We can discuss the details tomorrow. For now, just know that I've taken care of everything. Your year of rebellion is over, and you can return to your proper place in society." The dismissal was typical of how her aunt had always treated her opinions as trivial concerns that could be brushed aside. Once, Bethany would have acquiesced, retreating to her room to nurse her resentment in silence. But she was not the same woman who had fled to Texas 6 months ago. "No, Aunt Judith, we need to discuss it now." Bethany's firm tone clearly surprised her aunt. "I'm not marrying Edward Harrington." "Not at Christmas, not ever." Her aunt's expression darkened. "Don't be absurd, Bethany. The arrangement has been in place for years. Edward's father has already included your inheritance in their business plans. Then they'll need to make new plans." "My inheritance is mine to control now that I'm of age, and I won't have it used to prop up the Harringtons' failing investments. How dare you speak to me this way? Aunt Judith struggled to sit up straighter, her face flushing with anger. After all I've done for you, this is how you repay me. With disobedience and ingratitude, Bethany softened her tone, reminding herself of her aunt's fragile health. I am grateful for everything you've done for me, truly. You took me in when my parents died, gave me a home and education. But I'm a woman now, not a child to be directed. It's that place, isn't it? Texas has filled your head with common ideas. Her aunt's eyes narrowed. Or perhaps it's a man. Have you disgraced yourself with some frontier nobody? The scorn in her voice when speaking of Jackson made Bethany's temper flare, but she kept her composure. There is someone, yes. A good man, honorable and hardworking. He owns a ranch in Brownsville. A rancher. Aunt Judith spat the word as if it tasted foul. You would throw away your position in society, your family connections, for a cowboy. His name is Jackson Whitaker, and yes, I would. I am. Her aunt fell back against her pillows, a hand pressed dramatically to her heart. You'll ruin yourself. When society hears of this, I don't care what society thinks anymore. Bethany reached for her aunt's hand, which was withdrawn sharply. I came back to Boston to make sure you were well and to settle my affairs properly. I won't simply disappear from your life, but I am returning to Texas, Aunt Judith. I forbid it. Bethany stood, smoothing her skirts. You can't forbid it. I'm 22 years old and legally in control of my inheritance. I had hoped for your blessing, but I'll accept your disapproval if necessary. Her aunt turned her face away, tears glistening on her papery cheeks. Leave me. I can't bear to look at you right now. It hurt more than Bethany had expected, this rejection. Despite their differences, she loved her aunt and had hoped for some measure of understanding, if not approval. I'll come see you tomorrow, she said softly. Perhaps after you've had time to think about it. Get out. Her aunt's voice was shrill. You're just like your mother, selfish and willful, throwing away everything for some romantic notion. The comparison to her mother, who had defied her own family to marry Bethany's father, a man they considered beneath her, was likely meant as an insult. Instead, Bethany found it oddly comforting. Perhaps willfulness ran in the family after all. She left her aunt's room with a heavy heart but unshaken resolve. The next few weeks would not be easy, but she had faced worse odds in Texas and survived. In her old bedroom, everything remained exactly as she had left it: the canopied bed with its silk coverlet, the delicate vanity table, the bookshelf filled with appropriate literature for young ladies. It felt like stepping into a museum exhibit of someone else's life. Bethany unpacked her satchel, placing Jackson's wooden rose on the bedside table where she would see it first thing each morning. Then she sat at the writing desk by the window and began a letter. My dearest Jackson, she wrote, the familiar address bringing a smile to her lips. I have arrived safely in Boston, though I confess the city already feels foreign to me. Perhaps home is not a place at all, but a feeling one I've only found with you. The weeks that followed tested Bethany's determination in ways she hadn't anticipated. Aunt Judith alternated between icy silence and tearful recriminations. Edward Harrington, upon being informed of Bethany's decision, transformed from a politely distant suitor into a man scorned, threatening legal action over the breach of promise, though no formal engagement had ever been announced. Boston society, that nebulous yet powerful entity, reacted to the scandal with predictable horror. Former friends looked through Bethany as if she were invisible when they passed on the street. Invitations to social events mysteriously stopped arriving. Even the servants in her aunt's house treated her with a new wariness, as if her decision to marry for love rather than advantage might somehow be contagious. Through it all, Bethany found strength in the weekly letters from Jackson. His words, sometimes awkwardly phrased but always heartfelt, reminded her of what waited in Texas: honest work, genuine relationships, and a love unburdened by social calculations. "The foal is growing strong," he wrote in one letter. "I've named her Esperanza. It means hope in Spanish." Seemed fitting, given recent events. "The cabin has a new roof now, and I've added a proper porch where we can sit in the evenings and watch the sun set over the hills. The town misses you. Mrs. Patterson asks after you every time I stop by the general store. And even Sheriff Cooper admits things aren't quite as interesting without you around to stir up trouble." Another letter brought news of his expanding herd and plans for the future. Bought 10 more head of cattle from a rancher moving north. Got a good price, as he was eager to sell. "Been thinking about our future, Beth. This land has good water, rich soil. It could support orchards, maybe even those roses you miss so much. I want to build something lasting here, something for us, and maybe someday for our children." The mention of children had made Bethany blush, even alone in her room. But the vision it conjured of a home filled with laughter, of children with Jackson's blue eyes and her stubborn chin, was powerfully appealing. 6 weeks after her return to Boston, Bethany received word that her childhood friend, Clara Richardson, had given birth to her first child. Despite the social frost that had descended around Bethany, she went to call on Clara, bringing a hand-knitted blanket as a gift. Clara's husband, a prosperous merchant, was away on business, allowing the two women to speak frankly. After cooing over the baby, a robust boy with a shock of dark hair, they settled in Clara's sitting room for tea. "Everyone's talking about your decision to break with Edward," Clara said without preamble. "Aunt Judith must be beside herself." Bethany sipped her tea. "She's made her disappointment abundantly clear. And this rancher of yours, he must be extraordinary to inspire such devotion." "He is." Bethany smiled, thinking of Jackson. "Not in ways Boston society would recognize, perhaps. He doesn't have Edward's polished manners or family connections. But he's honest and hardworking, and when he looks at me, he sees me, not my inheritance or social standing." Clara studied her thoughtfully. "You've changed, Bethany. There's a certainty about you now, a strength I don't remember from before." "Texas changes a person," Bethany replied. "When you have to haul your own water and face real dangers, frivolous concerns fall away." "Dangers?" Clara looked alarmed. "What sort of dangers?" Bethany laughed. "Nothing so dramatic as the penny dreadfuls would have you believe, though I did once have to outrun a thunderstorm on horseback." "And the scorpions take some getting used to," Clara shuddered delicately. "It sounds dreadful, yet you're determined to return, more determined every day." Bethany set down her teacup. "Boston feels like a beautiful cage now. I can't breathe here anymore." Her friend reached across the table to take her hand. "Then you must go, my dear. And know that at least one person in Boston will be cheering for your happiness, even if I don't quite understand your choices." That simple acceptance, from someone who had known her since childhood, meant more to Bethany than she could express. It gave her the final push of courage needed to complete the business that had kept her in Boston. The next morning, Bethany visited her father's former lawyer, Mr. Blackwell, to discuss the management of her inheritance. By afternoon, she had established a trust that would provide for her aunt's care regardless of Bethany's marital status. A small monthly allowance would be set aside for Bethany's own use, with the bulk of the income reinvested. "Are you certain about these arrangements, Miss Vaughn?" Mr. Blackwell asked, peering at her over his spectacles. "Once established, this trust will be difficult to alter." "I'm certain." Bethany watched as he applied his signature to the documents. "My aunt will want for nothing, which is my primary concern, As for myself, I prefer to make my own way." The lawyer looked skeptical but said only, "As you wish." "The papers transferring ownership of the Texas property to your name will be ready tomorrow. It's most irregular for a young woman to purchase land independently, but given the unique nature of the frontier territories, we've found a way to manage it." The Texas property was a surprise Bethany had been planning for weeks. Using part of her inheritance, she had purchased the land adjoining Jackson's ranch, 200 acres of prime grazing land with a natural spring. It would be her contribution to their future, a way of demonstrating that she was coming to him as a partner, not a dependent. That evening, Bethany sat with her aunt in the formal dining room, the silence between them broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock and the occasional clink of silver against china. "I've made arrangements for your care," Bethany said finally. "A trust has been established that will provide for all your needs and maintain this house as long as you wish to live here." Aunt Judith set down her fork. "So, your mind is made up. You're abandoning your family, your position, everything you've been raised to value." "I'm not abandoning you, Aunt Judith. I'm choosing a different path." Bethany met her aunt's gaze steadily. "I leave for Texas next week." "So soon?" For a moment her aunt's stern facade cracked, revealing the lonely woman beneath. "I had hoped, perhaps with time." "I've given Boston 2 months," Bethany said gently. "It hasn't changed my heart." Her aunt dabbed at her lips with her napkin, a gesture Bethany recognized as a way to hide emotion. "This rancher, this Mr. Whitaker, he must be remarkable indeed." "He is to me." Aunt Judith sighed, her shoulders sagging slightly. "Your mother was just as determined when she set her mind on something. I fought her decision to marry your father, you know. We didn't speak for years afterward." A shadow of old regret crossed her face. "When they died and you came to live with me, I promised myself I wouldn't make the same mistakes with you. Yet here we are." The admission stunned Bethany. Her aunt had never spoken of regretting the estrangement from Bethany's mother. "It's not too late for us," Bethany said softly. "I'm not asking you to understand or approve of my choice, just to accept that it is my choice to make." Her aunt was silent for a long moment, studying the fine china plate before her as if it held answers. "I won't pretend to be happy about this, Bethany, but I don't wish to lose you as I lost your mother." It wasn't a blessing, but it was a concession perhaps the most Bethany could hope for from a woman of her aunt's generation and temperament. "Thank you," Bethany whispered. "That means more than I can say." The week passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Bethany packed only what she truly needed: practical clothing, a few cherished books, her mother's jewelry. The rest would remain in Boston or be sold, the proceeds added to her aunt's trust. On her last night in the city, Bethany sat at her writing desk, penning a final letter to Jackson before her departure. "By the time you receive this, I will already be on my way back to you," she wrote. "The arrangements are complete, my affairs in order. I bring with me a surprise that I hope will please you, a token of my commitment to our future together. These past months have been difficult but necessary. They've confirmed what I already knew in my heart. My place is with you, in the home we will build together. Boston holds nothing for me now but memories, some sweet, many bittersweet. I count the days until I see you again, until I can tell you in person what these pages can only hint at, that my heart has found its home, and it is wherever you are." Bethany signed the letter, sealed it, and placed it with her traveling things. Tomorrow would begin the long journey back to Texas, back to Jackson, back to the life she had chosen for herself. As dawn broke over Boston Harbor, Bethany stood on the deck of the steamship that would carry her south, watching the city's spires recede into the distance. The cool Atlantic breeze carried the scent of salt and possibility. She felt neither triumph nor regret, only a quiet certainty that she was moving in the right direction at last. The journey west seemed both longer and shorter than her previous travels. Longer because anticipation stretched each day to its breaking point. Shorter because each mile brought her closer to home, a concept that had acquired new meaning over the past months. From New Orleans, she took a riverboat up the Mississippi, then a stagecoach across the vast expanse of Texas. The landscape changed gradually, becoming more familiar as they approached Brownsville's scrubby mesquite and cactus, replacing the lusher vegetation of the east. The horizon stretching endlessly beneath a sky so vast, it made her feel simultaneously insignificant and infinite. Bethany had not sent word of her exact arrival date, wanting to surprise Jackson. As the stagecoach rolled into Brownsville on a crisp October afternoon, she felt a flutter of nervousness. What if he had changed his mind? What if the reality of her return couldn't match the anticipation they had built through their letters? The town looked much as she had left it, though a new building was going up on the corner of Main Street, and the general store sported a fresh coat of paint. A few familiar faces turned in surprise as she descended from the stagecoach, her traveling suit dusty but her spirits high. "Miss Vaughn," Mrs. Patterson called from the boardwalk. "Land's sakes, is that really you?" Bethany smiled, accepting the older woman's enthusiastic embrace. "It's me, Mrs. Patterson. I've come back." "Well, I'll be, and for good this time." The landlady pulled back to study her face. "For good," Bethany confirmed. Is Mr. Whitaker in town today?" Mrs. Patterson's eyes twinkled. "Not today, dear. He's out at his ranch, working on that house of his. Been at it like a man possessed these past weeks." The news sent a warm glow through Bethany. He had been preparing for her return just as he'd promised. "How do I get to his ranch?" she asked. "Is it far?" "About 5 miles north of town. Any of the livery boys can point you in the right direction." Mrs. Patterson patted her arm. "You've made that boy happier than I've ever seen him, Miss Vaughn. Whatever you did in Boston, I'm glad it brought you back to us." After arranging for her trunks to be stored temporarily at the hotel, Bethany hired a horse from the livery stable. The young stable hand gave her detailed directions to the Whitaker ranch, his eyes wide with barely suppressed excitement at being part of what he clearly considered a romantic reunion. "Mr. Whitaker talks about you all the time, miss," he confided, as he helped her mount the gentle mare. "Said you were the smartest, prettiest lady in all of Texas." Bethany blushed, adjusting her hat. "Did he now?" "Yes'm, and he's been building on that house something fierce. Got Mr. Cooper and some of the other men to help raise the frame last month. It's going to be real nice when it's finished." With a smile and a final thank you, Bethany set off north out of town, her heart racing with each hoofbeat. The road was well-traveled at first, but gradually became little more than a track winding through mesquite and chaparral. In the late afternoon light, the landscape glowed golden, shadows lengthening as the sun descended toward the horizon. After about an hour's ride, she crested a small rise and saw it a modest cabin nestled at the base of a gentle slope, with a larger structure in various stages of construction beside it. Smoke rose from the cabin's chimney, and a small herd of cattle grazed in a nearby pasture. Beyond, she could make out the glint of water, a creek or small river winding through the property. It was nothing like the grand estates of Boston, with their manicured gardens and imposing facades. Yet something about the simple honesty of the place called to her in a way those mansions never had. This was real, built by human hands from the raw materials of the land, created with purpose and care. As she approached, a figure emerged from the larger structure, tall, broad-shouldered, unmistakable even at a distance. Jackson paused in his work, shading his eyes against the setting sun as he spotted the rider approaching his property. Bethany urged the mare to a trot, her heart thundering in her chest. When she was close enough to see his face clearly, she reined in, suddenly unsure of her welcome despite all the letters, all the promises. For a long moment, Jackson stood frozen, as if afraid she might be a mirage that would vanish if he moved too quickly. Then he was running toward her, covering the ground between them with long strides. Bethany dismounted, her legs unsteady beneath her. She had rehearsed this moment 100 times during her journey, what she would say, how she would act. But now that it was here, words failed her. They didn't seem necessary. Jackson stopped just short of her, his blue eyes drinking in every detail of her face as if memorizing it anew. "You're here," he said simply, his voice rough with emotion. "You came back." Bethany nodded, tears blurring her vision. "I promised I would." He reached for her then, his hands gently framing her face. "I was starting to wonder if I'd dreamed you." "I'm real," she whispered. "And I'm staying, Jackson, if you still want me to." His answer was not in words but in the kiss that followed, tender at first, then deepening with all the longing of their months apart. Bethany melted into him, her arms sliding around his neck, the solid warmth of him more real than anything she had known in Boston. When they finally parted, both breathless, Jackson kept his arms around her as if afraid she might still disappear. "You have no idea how many times I've imagined this moment." Bethany smiled up at him. "Did your imagination do it justice? Not even close." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You're more beautiful than I remembered," she laughed, gesturing at her dusty traveling clothes. "I'm a mess. 3 days on a stagecoach isn't kind to anyone's appearance." "You're perfect," he insisted. Then, seeming to remember himself, he stepped back slightly. "You must be exhausted. Come, let me show you the cabin. It's not much yet, but it's wonderful," Bethany said, looking past him to the homestead. "All of it. Show me everything." Hand in hand, they walked toward the cabin, Jackson leading her mare. As they drew closer, Bethany could see the details that his letters had described: the new porch with its sturdy railing, the freshly glazed windows, the neat stack of firewood beside the door. "It's small," Jackson said, a note of apology in his voice as he opened the door for her. "Just 2 rooms for now. But the new house will have a proper parlor, a dining room, even a study if you want one." The cabin's interior was simple but well crafted, with a stone fireplace, a wooden table and chairs, and a curtained alcove that presumably held the bed. Everything was meticulously clean, and someone, Jackson himself, had placed a bunch of late wildflowers in a jar on the table. "You did all this yourself?" Bethany asked, trailing her fingers along the smooth surface of the mantelpiece. Jackson nodded, watching her anxiously. "Most of it. Had some help with the roof and the heavier work. Do you? Is it?" "It's perfect," she said firmly, turning to face him. "Truly, Jackson, I couldn't have imagined anything better." The relief in his expression was palpable. "It's just the beginning, Beth. Wait until you see the plans for the main house, and there's something else I want to show you." Taking her hand again, he led her back outside and toward a small rise beyond the cabin. As they crested it, Bethany gasped at what lay before her: a sweeping view of the property, with the Rio Grande glittering in the distance, and beyond it, the purple shadows of Mexico's mountains. "This is where I want to build the main house," Jackson said, his arm slipping around her waist. "So we can wake up to this view every morning." Bethany leaned into him, overcome by the beauty of the landscape and the knowledge that this man, this wonderful, patient man, had been planning their future all these months. "I have something for you too," she said, remembering her surprise. "A homecoming gift." Jackson raised an eyebrow. You being here is all the gift I need. Nevertheless, she pointed to the rolling grassland that stretched to the west of his property. That land, from the creek all the way to those far hills, it's yours now, or rather it's ours. He stared at her, then at the land she indicated. What are you saying? I bought it, Bethany explained. 200 acres of good grazing land with water rights to the spring on the north side. Mr. Blackwell arranged everything before I left Boston. Jackson shook his head in amazement. Beth, that must have cost a fraction of what my inheritance would have been wasted on in Boston, she interrupted. Consider it my investment in our future. For a moment he seemed at a loss for words, then he pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. I don't deserve you, he murmured. Of course you do. Bethany pulled back to look up at him. We deserve each other, Jackson, all the happiness we can build together. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, they stood together on the rise, planning their future with words and touches and promises. The main house would stand right here, they decided, with wide windows to catch the view and the breeze. The old cabin would become a guest house someday when they had family or friends visiting. Speaking of guests, Jackson said as they walked back toward the cabin, I invited some people for supper tomorrow, sort of a welcome home celebration. I hope that's all right. Bethany squeezed his hand. Of course. Who's coming? The Coopers, Mrs. Patterson, a few others who have been asking after you. He looked suddenly uncertain. I know it's not the kind of grand social event you might be used to in Boston. It sounds perfect, Bethany assured him. I'd much rather see friendly faces than attend another stuffy Boston dinner party. Inside the cabin, Jackson lit the lamps as darkness fell, the warm glow making the simple space feel cozy rather than cramped. He insisted on preparing supper himself, a surprisingly competent stew with fresh bread he'd brought from town that morning. You've learned to cook, Bethany observed, watching him move confidently around the small kitchen area. He grinned. Had to. Either that or starve. Mrs. Patterson gave me some lessons in exchange for fixing her roof last spring. As they ate at the wooden table, Bethany told him about Boston, her aunt's initial anger and eventual reluctant acceptance, Edward Harrington's threats, the social ostracism she had faced. I'm sorry it was so difficult, Jackson said, reaching across the table to take her hand. I hate to think of you facing all that alone. I wasn't alone, Bethany replied. I had your letters. They reminded me what I was fighting for. Later, as the night grew cooler, they sat together on the porch, wrapped in a woolen blanket against the chill. The stars emerged one by one, countless diamonds scattered across the velvet sky. I never saw stars like this in Boston, Bethany murmured, her head resting against Jackson's shoulder. Too many buildings, too many lamps. One of the things I love about this land, he said, his arm tightening around her. It shows you what's real, what matters. They fell silent, content to simply be together after so many months apart. Tomorrow would bring practicalities, unpacking her things, planning the finishing of the house, discussing their future in concrete terms. But tonight was for reconnection, for reassurance that the bond they had formed was real and lasting. As the evening deepened, weariness from her journey began to overtake Bethany. Jackson noticed her stifling a yawn and smiled. You're exhausted, he said, rising and helping her to her feet. Let me show you to your room. He led her back inside to a door she hadn't noticed earlier, a small addition to the cabin that hadn't been mentioned in his letters. I built this for you, he said, opening the door to reveal a snug bedroom with a narrow but comfortable-looking bed, a small dresser, and a window that would catch the morning light. Thought you might want your own space, at least until. He trailed off, color rising in his cheeks. Until they were married, he meant. The thoughtfulness of the gesture providing her with privacy and propriety touched Bethany deeply. "Thank you," she said softly. "It's lovely." Jackson cleared his throat. "Well, I'll leave you to rest. Your bags are already in there. If you need anything, I'm just through that curtain." Bethany caught his hand as he turned to go. "Jackson," he looked back, his expression questioning. Rising on tiptoe, she pressed a soft kiss to his lips. "I'm glad I came back," she whispered. "So very glad." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the horizon. "So am I, Beth. So am I." In the small bedroom, Bethany changed into her nightgown and slipped beneath the quilt, too tired even to properly unpack. The bed was narrower than she was used to, but the mattress was surprisingly comfortable, stuffed with what felt like clean straw or perhaps cotton. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her for a time. Everything felt new yet familiar, the sounds of the Texas night filtering through the window, the distant lowing of cattle, the occasional creak of the cabin settling. And beyond the thin wall, the knowledge that Jackson was there, just a few steps away. She had made the right decision, Bethany knew with bone-deep certainty. Whatever challenges lay ahead, and there would surely be many in this frontier life, they would face them together. With that comforting thought, she finally drifted into sleep, the wooden rose from Jackson's bedside table clutched in her hand like a talisman. Dawn came early to the Whitaker ranch, with roosters crowing and the first golden rays of sunlight spilling through the bedroom window. Bethany woke disoriented for a moment, the unfamiliar surroundings confusing her sleep-muddled mind. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back, and she smiled into her pillow. She was home. The sounds and smells of breakfast being prepared drew her from the warm cocoon of her bed. After dressing quickly in a simple skirt and blouse far more practical than the fashionable attire she had worn in Boston, Bethany emerged from her room to find Jackson at the small cast-iron stove, frying bacon and eggs. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, his face lighting up with a smile that made her heart skip. "Good morning. Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in months," she replied truthfully, crossing to his side. "That smells wonderful. Nothing fancy, but it'll keep us going." He leaned down to press a kiss to her forehead, the gesture so natural it seemed as if they had been sharing mornings like this for years rather than hours. After breakfast, Jackson gave her a proper tour of the property, the barn with its 3 horses and new foal, the cattle pastures, the vegetable garden he had started with more enthusiasm than skill. Everything showed signs of care and attention, though Jackson pointed out a dozen improvements he planned to make. "The creek never runs dry, even in the worst summers," he explained as they walked along its banks. "With the additional land you've bought, we could run twice as many cattle next year. And there's a spot up by the spring that might be perfect for an orchard." Bethany listened, enchanted by his enthusiasm and the easy way he included her in his plans. This was partnership in its truest form, not the business arrangement her aunt had tried to force upon her with Edward Harrington, but a joining of lives and dreams. "What do you think?" Jackson asked, suddenly self-conscious after outlining his vision for the ranch. "Is it too much? Too ambitious?" Bethany squeezed his hand. "It's perfect, Jackson, all of it." That afternoon, as promised, guests began arriving for the welcome home celebration. Sheriff and Mrs. Cooper came first, bringing a fresh baked pie and warm embraces for Bethany. Mrs. Patterson followed shortly after with her nephew Tommy, who had given Bethany directions the day before. By sunset, the small cabin was filled with friendly faces, a handful of neighbors from nearby ranches, the general store owner and his wife, even the station master who had sold Bethany her ticket to Boston months ago. It was nothing like the formal dinner parties of Beacon Hill, with their rigid protocols and whispered judgments. Here, people sat where they could find space, balancing plates on their knees, conversation flowing as freely as the coffee and whiskey Jackson provided. Children ran in and out, chasing each other around the yard in the gathering dusk. Someone produced a fiddle, and impromptu dancing broke out on the packed earth in front of the cabin. Watching it all from the porch steps, Bethany felt a contentment she had rarely experienced in Boston. These people had accepted her without question, welcomed her back with genuine warmth. There were no hidden agendas, no social calculations, just the simple pleasure of community. "Penny for your thoughts," Jackson said, settling beside her with 2 cups of coffee. Bethany accepted one gratefully. "I was just thinking how different this is from Boston society. How much more real," he nodded, understanding without further explanation. "These are good people, salt of the earth, as they say." "Our people now," Bethany said, leaning against his shoulder. Jackson's arm slipped around her waist. "Our people," he agreed. As the evening wore on and guests began to depart, Mrs. Cooper pulled Bethany aside for a quiet word. "I'm so glad you came back, dear," the older woman said, clasping Bethany's hands in her own. "I don't think I've ever seen Jackson so happy." "He makes me happy too," Bethany replied, her gaze seeking out Jackson where he stood saying goodbye to the last neighbors. Mrs. Cooper smiled knowingly. "When's the wedding to be then?" The direct question caught Bethany off guard. "We haven't. That is, he hasn't. Hasn't asked you yet." Mrs. Cooper looked scandalized. "What is that boy waiting for? You two are clearly meant for each other." Bethany blushed. "It's only been a day since I returned. HMPH. Well, men sometimes need a little nudging." The sheriff's wife patted her arm. "Don't let him dither too long. Winter's coming, and you'll want to be settled before the cold sets in." After the last guest had gone, Bethany and Jackson stood together on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the clear night sky. The cabin behind them was a bit of a mess, dishes to be washed, furniture to be rearranged, but neither seemed inclined to tackle those chores just yet. "Thank you for arranging that," Bethany said, her hand finding his in the darkness. "It was wonderful to see everyone." Jackson squeezed her fingers gently. "They've missed you. We all have." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the distant hooting of an owl and the whisper of the breeze through the mesquite trees. "Beth," Jackson said finally, his voice thoughtful. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you, something important." Bethany's heart quickened. Was this what Mrs. Cooper had hinted at? "Yes." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. In the starlight, his expression was earnest, almost solemn. "These past months with you in Boston and me here, I've had a lot of time to think about what I want, what matters to me." She nodded, encouraging him to continue. "And what I realized is that none of this, not the ranch, not the cattle, not even the house I'm building, none of it means anything without you to share it with." Jackson took a deep breath. "I'm not a wealthy man, Beth. I can't offer you the kind of life you had in Boston. But everything I have, everything I am, is yours if you want it." Bethany felt tears pricking at her eyes. "Jackson, wait. Let me finish." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing something small that glinted in the starlight. "I've been carrying this around for weeks, waiting for the right moment." It was a ring, a simple band of silver with a small, perfect pearl set in its center. "It was my mother's," Jackson explained, his voice thick with emotion. "My father gave it to her when they homesteaded in Kansas, before they came to Texas. It's not diamonds or gold, but it's beautiful," Bethany whispered, her vision blurring with tears. Jackson sank to one knee, still holding her hand. the ring balanced in his palm. "Bethany Vaughn, will you marry me? Build a life with me here. Be my wife, my partner, the mother of my children someday." The tears spilled over then, running unchecked down Bethany's cheeks. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking on the word. "Yes, Jackson, 1,000 times yes." His face broke into a smile of such joy that it nearly took her breath away. With slightly trembling fingers, he slid the ring onto her hand, a perfect fit, as if it had been made for her all along. Then he was on his feet again, gathering her into his arms, his kiss tasting of coffee and whiskey and promises. Bethany clung to him, her heart so full it seemed impossible that her chest could contain it. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Jackson pressed his forehead to hers. "I love you, Beth, more than I ever thought it was possible to love another person." "I love you too," she whispered back. "Enough to leave everything I knew, enough to build something new with you." They stood together on the porch of what would soon be their first shared home, the vast Texas sky stretching overhead, the future unfolding before them like the pages of a book waiting to be written. 2 weeks later, on a crisp November morning with the smell of autumn in the air, Bethany Vaughn became Bethany Whitaker in a simple ceremony at the Brownsville church. She wore a dress of pale blue silk, her one concession to Boston fashion, with wildflowers in her hair instead of the traditional veil. Jackson, looking almost uncomfortable in his best suit, couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked down the aisle on Sheriff Cooper's arm. The whole town turned out for the celebration afterward, with tables set up in the town square, food contributed by every household, and music that continued well into the evening. It was nothing like the formal wedding Aunt Judith had envisioned for her niece, but to Bethany, it was perfect in every way. As night fell, and the festivities showed no sign of abating, the newlyweds slipped away, riding back to the ranch beneath a canopy of stars. The cabin welcomed them with the soft glow of lamps that Mrs. Cooper had thoughtfully lit before they arrived. The bedroom freshly arranged with clean linens and vases of late autumn flowers. Standing in the middle of what was now truly their home, Bethany turned to her husband, the word still new and wonderful in her mind. "Well, Mr. Whitaker," she said, a smile playing at her lips, "it seems we've started quite the adventure." Jackson drew her into his arms, his expression tender. "It's only just beginning, Mrs. Whitaker, only just beginning." Morning came softly, sunlight filtering through the curtains to paint golden patterns across the rumpled bedsheets. Bethany stirred first, the unfamiliar but welcome weight of Jackson's arm around her waist reminding her of all that had changed. She lay still for a moment, savoring the warmth of him beside her, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the knowledge that this was now her life, waking each morning with this man she loved beyond reason. Carefully, trying not to wake him, she slipped from beneath his arm. There were chores to be done, breakfast to prepare. Her first day as a ranch wife shouldn't begin with laziness, no matter how tempting it might be to remain in the cocoon of their bed. She dressed quietly, pinning up her hair with practiced motions. The gold band on her finger caught the sunlight, still new enough to draw her gaze with each movement. Mrs. Whitaker. The name resonated within her, bringing a smile to her lips as she padded barefoot toward the kitchen. The fire in the stove had died down overnight, leaving only glowing embers. Bethany added kindling, coaxing the flames back to life with patient attention. When the stove was hot enough, she put coffee on to boil and began mixing biscuit dough, her movements becoming more confident with each passing minute. She might not have Mrs. Cooper's years of experience, but she had watched carefully during her previous months in Brownsville, determined to learn the domestic skills her Boston upbringing had never taught her. So absorbed was she in her task that she didn't hear Jackson approach until his arms slipped around her waist from behind, his chin coming to rest on her shoulder. "You should have woken me," he murmured, pressing a kiss to the side of her neck. Bethany leaned back against him, her hands still covered in flour. "You were sleeping so peacefully, and I wanted to surprise you with breakfast." He turned her in his arms, unmindful of the flour that dusted his shirt. "Every morning I wake up to find you here will be a surprise, Beth." "The best kind." The sincerity in his voice made her heart swell. She rose on tiptoe to kiss him properly, morning breath and all. "Good morning, husband." His smile was slow and sweet. "Good morning, wife." They worked together to finish breakfast, moving around the small kitchen with a synchronicity that belied their newlywed status. By the time they sat down to eat, the sun was fully up, promising another beautiful autumn day. "I need to check on the north pasture fencing today," Jackson said, buttering a biscuit. "One of the yearlings got out yesterday, which means there's a weak spot somewhere." Bethany nodded, already mentally planning her day. "I'll work on unpacking the rest of my things and see what can be done about making curtains for the new windows. Mrs. Patterson mentioned she has some fabric she's willing to part with." It was a simple exchange, domestic and ordinary, yet it filled Bethany with a sense of rightness. This was what she had chosen, not the idle luxury of Boston society, but purposeful work alongside the man she loved, building something meaningful together. After breakfast, they parted for their separate tasks, Jackson heading out to the pastures while Bethany tackled the remaining unpacked trunks in what was now their bedroom. Among the practical clothing and personal items, she found treasures she had nearly forgotten: her mother's favorite book of poetry, a small watercolor she had painted of the Boston public garden, the wooden rose Jackson had carved for her, now carefully wrapped in silk. She placed each item thoughtfully around the cabin, transforming the space from bachelor quarters to a home that reflected both of them. The rose went on the mantelpiece, the watercolor beside it. Her books found space on the rough shelves Jackson had built, their colorful spines brightening the wall. By midday, the cabin had taken on a different character, still simple and rustic, but with touches of elegance and femininity that softened its edges. Satisfied with her morning's work, Bethany began preparing a simple lunch to take out to Jackson in the fields. She found him mending fence in the north pasture, his shirt sticking to his back with sweat despite the cool air. He looked up at her approach, his face breaking into a smile that still had the power to make her heart skip. "Perfect timing," he said, setting down his tools and accepting the cloth-wrapped bundle she offered. "I was just thinking about heading back to the house." They sat together on a fallen log, sharing the bread, cheese, and apples she had brought. The landscape stretched before them, rolling grassland dotted with mesquite and oak, cattle grazing peacefully in the distance. It was nothing like the manicured beauty of Boston's parks, yet Bethany found it more compelling, wild and honest, demanding respect rather than simply admiration. "I've been thinking," Jackson said after a while, "about the addition to the cabin. With winter coming, we might be better off focusing on making what we have more comfortable, rather than pushing to get the main house built before spring." Bethany nodded, understanding the practical considerations. "That makes sense. The cabin is cozy enough for two, and there's no need to rush the larger house." He looked relieved at her easy acceptance. "Some of the men from town have offered to help with insulating the walls better and adding a proper bedroom for us, instead of the temporary one I built for you. We could have that done before the first real cold snap." "I'd like that." Bethany leaned against his shoulder, content with the simplicity of their plans. "And in spring, we can focus on the main house again." They sat in comfortable silence for a time, finishing their lunch and watching the clouds drift across the vast Texas sky. It struck Bethany that this moment, ordinary, unhurried, shared, was exactly what she had been seeking without realizing it. Not grand romance or social prestige, but partnership and peace. "We should head back," Jackson said eventually, gathering their things. "I've still got the south fence to check before sundown." As they walked back toward the cabin, hand in hand, Bethany found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. From the lonely girl in her aunt's Beacon Hill mansion, to the independent woman who had first come to Brownsville seeking adventure, to the wife and partner she was becoming now, each step had been necessary, each choice leading inexorably to this moment. "Penny for your thoughts," Jackson said, echoing the question he had asked the night of her welcome home celebration. Bethany smiled up at him, squinting slightly against the afternoon sun. "I was just thinking how strange life is. How a series of choices, some made almost by chance, can lead to exactly where you're meant to be." He considered this, his expression thoughtful. "Like you deciding to come to Texas in the first place, or me happening to be in town the day you arrived." "Exactly. If any one of those things had been different." She let the thought trail off, unwilling to contemplate the alternatives. Jackson squeezed her hand. "But they weren't different. Here we are." Here they were indeed husband and wife, partners in the truest sense, standing at the beginning of a life neither could have imagined a year earlier. Bethany leaned into his side, grateful for the twist of fate that had brought her to this dusty corner of Texas, to this man who saw her more clearly than anyone ever had. "Here we are," she agreed softly. "Exactly where we're supposed to be." As winter settled over the Rio Grande Valley, bringing cooler temperatures and occasional rain but little of the snow that blanketed Boston at this time of year, the Whitakers' life fell into a rhythm of shared work and simple pleasures. The cabin, improved with the help of neighbors and friends, proved more than adequate for their needs. The new bedroom Jackson had promised was completed just before Christmas, giving them a spacious, private retreat that quickly became Bethany's favorite part of the house. Letters arrived occasionally from Boston Stiff, formal notes from Aunt Judith, warmer correspondence from Clara, and a few other friends who had maintained contact, despite society's disapproval. Bethany wrote back faithfully, her descriptions of ranch life and her happiness with Jackson gradually thawing even her aunt's frosty tone. "She asks when we might visit Boston," Bethany told Jackson one evening as they sat by the fire, she with her mending, he with a leather bridle he was repairing. He looked up, surprised. "Your aunt wants us to visit." "She phrases it as when you might tire of your frontier experiment and return to civilization," Bethany admitted with a small smile. "But it's the first time she's acknowledged that we might someday be welcome in her home." Jackson considered this, his hand still working the leather. "Would you want to go? Someday, I mean." The question gave Bethany pause. She had left Boston with no intention of returning, at least not in the near future. Yet she couldn't deny that there were aspects of her former life. She occasionally missed the libraries and bookshops, the concerts, the changing of the seasons in the public garden. "Perhaps in a year or two," she said finally. "Not to stay, just to visit. To show her that I'm happy, that I've made a good life here." Jackson nodded, his expression softening. "We'll go whenever you want, Beth. Your aunt is your family and family matters." His easy acceptance, his willingness to face what would undoubtedly be a difficult visit for his sake, only confirmed what Bethany already knew: she had married not just a handsome cowboy, but a man of genuine character and compassion. "I love you," she said simply, setting aside her mending to cross the room and perch on the arm of his chair. "Have I told you that today?" He smiled up at her, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "Only twice. I was beginning to worry." Winter turned to spring with a riot of wildflowers carpeting the hills around the ranch. True to their plan, work on the main house resumed, with Jackson overseeing every detail of the construction. Bethany, meanwhile, had her own project transforming a section of land near the creek into a garden that would provide vegetables for their table. And, eventually, the roses she had described to Jackson all those months ago. It was hard work, turning the raw Texas soil into something that would nurture delicate plants. But Bethany approached the task with the same determination she had brought to every aspect of ranch life. By the time the first walls of the main house were rising on the hill, her garden was beginning to take shape, with neat rows of early plantings and the promise of more to come. One afternoon in late spring, as Bethany was working in the garden, she felt a sudden wave of dizziness that forced her to sit down abruptly on the ground. The sensation passed quickly, but it was followed by a realization that made her heart skip. Her monthly courses, always regular as clockwork, were late. Very late. She counted back in her mind, trying to recall the last time. Before Christmas. No, early January, which meant. The possibility both thrilled and terrified her. A baby. Jackson's child growing within her. It was too soon to be certain, but the more Bethany considered it, the more convinced she became. The occasional morning nausea she had dismissed as a reaction to the strong coffee Jackson brewed. The unusual fatigue that had her napping in the afternoons, something she had never done before. The tenderness in her breasts that she had attributed to the physical demands of ranch work. Should she tell Jackson now, or wait until she was more certain? The question preoccupied her as she finished her work in the garden and headed back to the cabin to prepare supper. By the time she heard the sound of hoofbeats announcing his return from checking the far pastures, Bethany had decided. This joy was too great to keep to herself, even if there was still a small chance she might be mistaken. Jackson entered the cabin with his usual energy, hanging his hat on the peg by the door and crossing to where Bethany stood by the stove. His kiss, as always, made her heart flutter, but this time it was accompanied by the secret knowledge of what might be growing between them. "Something smells good," he said, glancing at the pot simmering on the stove. "What are we having?" "Venison stew," Bethany replied, stirring the contents. "Mr. Cooper brought over some meat from his hunting trip yesterday." Jackson washed his hands at the basin, speaking of his day's work with the easy familiarity of a man who knows his words are valued. Bethany listened, responding in all the right places, but her mind was racing ahead to the moment when she would share her suspicion with him. They sat down to supper at the sturdy table Jackson had built, the stew accompanied by fresh bread Bethany had baked that morning. The routine was comfortable, established over months of marriage, yet tonight it seemed charged with additional meaning. Every domestic act, every shared glance, existed within the context of what might be changing in their lives. "You're quiet tonight," Jackson observed, reaching for another piece of bread. "Everything all right?" Bethany set down her spoon, her heart suddenly pounding. "I think. That is, I believe." She took a deep breath. "Jackson, I think I might be expecting a baby." The bread halted midway to his mouth, his eyes widening. "A baby," he repeated, as if the word were in a foreign language. She nodded, watching his face carefully. "It's too early to be certain, but all the signs are there." For a long moment, Jackson sat frozen, processing her words. Then a smile broke across his face, so full of joy and wonder that it brought tears to Bethany's eyes. "A baby," he said again, this time with reverence. "Our baby." He was out of his chair in an instant, circling the table to kneel beside her, his hands reaching for hers. "Are you feeling well?" Do you need to rest more? Should we send for the doctor? The rush of questions made Bethany laugh through her tears. I'm fine, Jackson. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. Not my wife, he said, his voice husky with emotion. Not our child. The possessive pronoun sent a thrill through Bethany. Our child. The culmination of their love, the beginning of the family they had sometimes spoken of in quiet moments before sleep claimed them. Jackson's hand moved to rest gently on her still flat stomach, his touch reverent. When? When will the baby come? Bethany calculated quickly. November, I think, around the time of our first anniversary. Perfect timing. He grinned, the expression making him look younger, almost boyish. The house will be finished by then. Our child will be born in a proper home. The realization that their plans for the main house, now, had an even more meaningful deadline sobered them both. A baby changed everything, creating an urgency for the comfortable home they had been building at a measured pace, requiring preparations neither had considered in detail before. We'll need a cradle, Jackson said, his mind clearly racing ahead. And a room for the nursery with a window that gets the morning sun but not too much heat in summer. Bethany smiled at his practical concerns, so typically Jackson. Yes, and baby clothes and diapers and a dozen other things. But we have time, my love. 7 months or so, he nodded, though the slightly dazed look remained in his eyes. A baby, he repeated once more, as if saying it aloud might make the miracle more comprehensible. I'm going to be a father. The wonder in his voice matched the feeling expanding in Bethany's own heart. From that first morning when she had tried to flee his room before he woke, to this moment of shared joy beside their supper table, it had been a journey neither could have anticipated, yet one that felt inevitable in retrospect. And I'm going to be a mother, she said softly, the words new and strange on her tongue. We're going to be parents, Jackson. He kissed her then, a kiss that held all the tenderness and passion of their love, all the promise of their shared future. When they parted, both a little breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. Thank you, he whispered. For what? For staying that morning, for coming back to Brownsville, for loving me, for this. His hand moved again to her stomach. For everything. Bethany covered his hand with her own, feeling the strength in his fingers, the gentleness in his touch. No, Jackson. Thank you for catching my hand when I tried to leave, for asking me to stay when it would have been easier to let me go. They remained that way for a long moment, connected by touch and gaze and the new life growing between them. Outside, the Texas dusk gathered, stars beginning to appear in the eastern sky. Inside, in the warm circle of lamplight, a family was being born. The news of Bethany's pregnancy spread quickly through the small community of Brownsville and the surrounding ranches. Friends and neighbors responded with warm congratulations and practical assistance, from Mrs. Cooper's offer to sew baby clothes to Sheriff Cooper's promise to help Jackson finish the main house before winter. First babies in this part of the country are special, the sheriff explained when Jackson protested that he couldn't ask for so much help. They're a sign that the community is putting down roots, becoming something lasting. Everyone wants to be part of that. As summer heat settled over the Rio Grande Valley, work on the main house progressed at a remarkable pace. What had been just a framework in spring transformed into a proper home, with sturdy walls, a sweeping porch that wrapped around 3 sides of the building, and windows that caught both the morning and evening light. Inside, rooms took shape: a spacious parlor, a dining room large enough for gatherings, a kitchen with the modern conveniences Bethany had secretly missed from Boston, and upstairs, 3 bedrooms, including a nursery with the morning sun window Jackson had insisted upon. Bethany's body changed too. her slender frame gradually accommodating the growing life within. By July, there was no hiding the gentle curve of her stomach, and by August, the baby's movements had become distinct enough for Jackson to feel when he placed his hand on her belly. "He's strong," he declared the first time he felt the fluttering kick against his palm. "Going to be a fine cowboy someday, or she might be a strong cowgirl," Bethany countered with a smile. "Either way, this child is already making their opinions known." As her pregnancy advanced, Bethany found herself unable to do as much physical work around the ranch, a limitation that sometimes frustrated her independent spirit. Jackson insisted she rest more, especially during the hottest part of the day, and neighbors often stopped by to help with tasks she would normally have handled herself. "I'm pregnant, not incapacitated," she complained one afternoon when Mrs. Cooper shooed her away from the clothesline. The older woman clucked her tongue. "First babies need extra care, my dear. Trust me on this. My Daniel Jr. gave me such a time when I was carrying him that the doctor ordered me to bed for the last month." Bethany shuddered at the thought of such confinement. "I hope it doesn't come to that. I'd go mad stuck in bed for weeks." Mrs. Cooper patted her arm sympathetically. "Every pregnancy is different, but do listen to your body, child. It knows what it needs." By September, the main house was nearly complete, lacking only interior finishing touches that Bethany oversaw with meticulous attention. The move from the cabin to the new house was accomplished over several days, with friends again pitching in to transport furniture and belongings up the hill. Standing in the completed nursery, with its cheerful yellow walls and white lace curtains, Bethany felt a wave of emotion wash over her. This room, this house, represented everything she and Jackson had built together, not just physical structures, but a life, a future, a legacy for the child who would soon join them. "You like it?" Jackson asked, coming to stand beside her, his arm slipping around her waist, a waist that had expanded considerably in recent months. Bethany leaned into him, grateful for his solid presence. "It's perfect, all of it." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Just like its mother." The compliment made her laugh, one hand moving to support her rounded belly. "I'm as big as a house and twice as awkward. Perfect is hardly the word." Jackson's expression grew serious. "You've never been more beautiful to me than you are right now, Beth. Carrying our child, making our house into a home, facing all of this with such courage, you amaze me every day." His sincerity brought tears to her eyes, a not uncommon occurrence in these emotional later months of pregnancy. "I love you," she whispered, the simple phrase containing all she couldn't find more elaborate words to express. October brought cooler temperatures and the completion of the final details on the house. The garden Bethany had started in spring had yielded a bountiful harvest, much of which she preserved for the winter months ahead. The rose bushes she had ordered from a catalog, planted with such hope near the porch, had established themselves and even produced a few late blooms before the season ended. As her time grew nearer, Bethany found herself thinking often of her parents, of the family she had lost so young. Would her mother be proud of the woman she had become? Would her father approve of the life she had chosen, so different from the Boston society they had known? "I wish they could see all this," she told Jackson one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. "My parents, I mean. I wish they could know you, know the home we've built." Jackson took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "I believe they do know in some way, and I believe they would be proud of you, Beth. How could they not be?" The simple faith in his words comforted her more than elaborate reassurances might have. Jackson had a way of cutting through complexity to the heart of matters, one of the many qualities she had come to rely on in their life together. November arrived with a crispness in the air that reminded Bethany, just slightly, of Boston autumns. Their first wedding anniversary passed in quiet celebration, with gifts exchanged and private promises renewed. The baby, apparently comfortable where it was, showed no signs of making an early appearance. Stubborn, like both its parents, Mrs. Cooper declared when she visited to check on Bethany's preparations. That child will come when it's good and ready, not a moment before. Another week passed, and then another. Bethany grew increasingly uncomfortable, her back aching, sleep elusive, patience wearing thin. Jackson became more protective than ever, reluctant to leave her alone for even short periods, enlisting neighbors to stay with her when ranch work demanded his attention. "I'm not going to shatter," Bethany assured him as November drew to a close with still no sign of labor. "Women have been doing this since Eve. Humor me," he replied, kissing her forehead. "Just until our son or daughter decides to join us." The night it finally began was unseasonably warm for late November, with a full moon hanging low in the eastern sky. Bethany woke shortly after midnight with a dull ache in her lower back that gradually intensified into something more rhythmic, more purposeful. She lay still for a time, counting the minutes between sensations, making certain before she woke Jackson. When she was sure, she touched his shoulder gently. "Jackson, it's time." He was instantly alert, sitting up in the darkness, his voice steady despite the alarm she knew he must be feeling. "How far apart are the pains?" "About 15 minutes still. We have time." Bethany swung her legs over the side of the bed, grimacing as another contraction built. But someone should fetch Mrs. Cooper and the doctor. Jackson was already pulling on his clothes, moving with the efficient urgency of a man who had planned this moment in his mind many times. "I'll go myself. It'll be faster than sending a hand from the bunkhouse." He helped her into a comfortable chair near the window, where the moonlight provided enough illumination to see by, then lit the lamp on the bedside table. "Do you need anything before I go? Water? Another blanket?" Bethany shook her head, touched by his concern even as another pain began to build. "Just hurry back." With a final kiss to her forehead, he was gone, his footsteps quick on the stairs. Moments later, she heard the pound of hoofbeats as he galloped toward town. Left alone, Bethany focused on her breathing, on the mysterious work her body was undertaking. Each contraction was stronger than the last, coming more frequently as the night hours passed. By the time she heard horses approaching, the sky outside her window had begun to lighten with the first hint of dawn. Mrs. Cooper arrived first, bustling into the bedroom with the confidence of a woman who had attended dozens of births. "Well now, let's see how things are progressing," she said, helping Bethany onto the bed for an examination. The doctor arrived shortly after, bringing his bag of instruments and a more clinical approach that somehow reassured Bethany despite his less comforting manner. Jackson hovered anxiously until Mrs. Cooper shooed him from the room. "Go make yourself useful downstairs," she instructed. "Boil water, prepare clean towels. We'll call you when there's news." What followed was the most challenging and transformative experience of Bethany's life. Hours blurred together in a haze of pain and effort, her world narrowing to the rhythm of contractions and the encouraging voices of Mrs. Cooper and the doctor. Sometime in the late morning, when Bethany felt she could endure no more, Mrs. Cooper took her hand firmly. "It's time to push now, my dear. Your baby is ready to meet you." With strength she didn't know she possessed, Bethany bore down, focusing all her remaining energy on bringing her child into the world. After what seemed an eternity but was probably only minutes, a new sound filled the room, the indignant cry of a newborn taking its first breath. "A girl," the doctor announced, holding up the tiny, squalling infant for Bethany to see. A perfect little girl. Tears of exhaustion and joy streamed down Bethany's face as Mrs. Cooper cleaned the baby quickly, then placed the swaddled bundle in her arms. Looking down at her daughter's red, wrinkled face, Bethany felt a love so overwhelming it seemed to physically expand her chest. "She's beautiful," she whispered, counting tiny fingers that curled around her own with surprising strength. "So beautiful." "Shall I fetch your husband?" Mrs. Cooper asked, her own eyes suspiciously bright. "He's been wearing a path in the downstairs floorboards." Bethany nodded, unable to take her eyes off her daughter's face. "Yes, please. Tell him he has a daughter." Moments later, Jackson burst into the room, his face a mixture of anxiety and hope. When he saw Bethany propped against the pillows, their child in her arms, he stopped abruptly, as if afraid to approach something so precious. "Come meet your daughter," Bethany said softly, holding out one hand to him. He moved to the bedside, sinking onto the edge of the mattress, his eyes fixed on the tiny face peeking out from the blanket. "A daughter," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "Our daughter." Carefully, as if handling the most fragile glass, Jackson reached out to touch the baby's cheek with one finger. The infant turned toward the touch, her tiny mouth making sucking motions. "She knows her father," Bethany said, smiling despite her exhaustion. Jackson's eyes, when they met hers, were filled with tears. "Thank you," he whispered. "For her, for everything." Mrs. Cooper and the doctor discreetly withdrew, leaving the new family alone for these precious first moments together. Bethany shifted slightly, wincing at the residual discomfort, and offered the baby to Jackson. "Would you like to hold her?" The look of terror that crossed his face was almost comical. I don't know how. My hands are too big, too rough." "Nonsense," Bethany said, guiding his arms into position. "Just support her head like this. There." With infinite care, Jackson cradled his daughter against his broad chest. The contrast between his strength and her tiny form made Bethany's heart constrict with love for them both. This was her family now, this good man, and the miraculous new life they had created together. "What shall we call her?" Jackson asked, his gaze never leaving the baby's face. They had discussed names often in the preceding months, considering family traditions from both sides, but had never settled on a final choice. Now, looking at their daughter, Bethany knew with certainty. "Hope," she said. "Hope Elizabeth Whitaker." Jackson nodded, the rightness of the name evident in his expression. "Hope, for all that she represents for us, for this land, for the future." "And Elizabeth for my mother," Bethany added softly, "to honor what came before. It's perfect." Jackson leaned down to press a gentle kiss to Hope's forehead. "Welcome to the world, Hope Elizabeth. We've been waiting for you." As the December sun climbed higher in the Texas sky, spilling golden light through the bedroom windows, the Whitaker family rested together in the home they had built. Outside, ranch hands went about their duties, cattle grazed in the winter pastures, and life continued its steady rhythm. Inside, everything had changed, transformed by the arrival of 8 pounds of new life and limitless possibility. Bethany watched her husband and daughter, contentment washing over her like a gentle wave. From that morning 9 months ago when she had tried to leave before Jackson woke, to this moment of perfect fulfillment, the journey had been unexpected, challenging, and more rewarding than she could have imagined. The cowboy had caught her hand and asked her to stay. In doing so, he had offered her not just his love, but a home, a purpose, a family. And in accepting, Bethany had found not just happiness, but herself, the woman she was always meant to be. As if sensing her thoughts, Jackson looked up, his eyes meeting hers over their daughter's dark head. No words were necessary between them now. Everything that mattered had been said, proven, lived. What remained was the journey ahead, raising their daughter, building their ranch, growing old together beneath the vast Texas sky. "I love you," Bethany said simply, because some truths bear repeating no matter how well known they may be. Jackson's smile was like sunrise breaking over the horizon. "And I love you, Mrs. Whitaker, now and always." In the circle of his arms, Hope Elizabeth Whitaker slept peacefully, dreaming whatever dreams come to those newly arrived in the world. Outside the window, a late blooming rose caught the winter sunlight, its petals unfurling in defiance of the season, a promise of beauty persisting against all odds, much like the love that had brought them all to this perfect moment of belonging.